Okay, so imagine this, a clash of titans. We're talking about two ancient superpowers locked in this epic, century-long struggle to control pretty much their entire world. This is the story of the Punic Wars, the incredible conflict between the rising power of Rome and the mighty empire of Carthage. And really, it all boiled down to one single, brutal question. You see, the Mediterranean Sea was the superhighway of trade, wealth, and power. There just wasn't room for two bosses. So, between these two giants, who was going to rule the waves and, in doing so, shape the entire future of civilization?
On one side, you've got Rome. They were a land power, through and through, with what was probably the most disciplined and hardcore army on the planet, all organized as a republic. And on the other side, Carthage, a massive trading empire based in North Africa. These guys were the masters of the sea, with a navy that was basically unbeatable. They were total opposites, and you just knew a collision was coming.
So let's set the stage a little. To really get why these two were on a collision course, we need to understand who they were and, what prize they were both gunning for.
First things first, why are they even called the Punic Wars? Well, it's actually pretty simple. Punic was just the Roman word for the people of Carthage. See, their ancestors came from a place called Phoenicia. So Punic basically just means Carthaginian. And there you go, mystery solved.
Another key thing to remember is that at this point, Rome wasn't the empire we all think of, with an emperor in charge. It was a republic. So instead of a king or one single ruler, they had a group of elected leaders called the Senate, and they made all the big decisions for everybody, including the decision to go to war.
And that decision to go to war? It came down to this one island, this incredibly valuable piece of real estate, Sicily. It's this big, fertile island, smack dab in between Italy and North Africa. It was loaded with grain, had amazing ports. It was the strategic prize. Both Rome and Carthage wanted it, and neither one was going to back down.
So this leads us to one of the coolest military inventions of the ancient world. You see, Rome had a massive problem. They were a land power stuck in a sea war, and they needed a total game changer, and they needed it fast.
The problem was this. The First Punic War was going to be decided on the water, and Rome, well, they didn't really have a navy to speak of. Their legions were absolute masters on land, but at sea, they were completely outmatched. If they couldn't figure out how to win on the water, they were going to lose the war. It was that simple. So if you can't win a game, what do? You change the rules.
And their solution was as brilliant as it was brutal. They invented this thing called the corvus, which is Latin for crow. It was basically a giant boarding bridge with this huge, heavy spike on the end. They'd sail right up to a Carthaginian ship, drop the bridge, and that spike would slam down into the enemy's deck, locking the two ships together. And then, the Roman legionaries would charge across. In an instant, they'd turn a sea battle into the one thing they were the best at, a land battle. So, thanks to the corvus and just their sheer refusal to quit, Rome actually won the first round after 23 long years of fighting. They got Sicily, they forced Carthage to pay a massive fine, and in the process, they became a real naval power. But this was far from over. Humiliated, Carthage started building a new power base over in Spain, and you can bet Rome was watching, nervously. Round 2 was definitely coming. And this is where we get to the most famous part of this whole rivalry, the Second Punic War. This part of the story is completely dominated by one of the most legendary generals in all of history, Hannibal Barca. Hannibal knew he couldn't take on Rome's powerful new navy head-on, so he did something absolutely unthinkable. He took his massive army, complete with dozens of war elephants, on this insane, treacherous march, all the way from Spain, over the freezing, snow-covered Alps, and down into Italy from the north. It was an audacious, almost crazy plan that no Roman ever saw coming. So after Hannibal pulls off a few surprise wins, the Romans decide, that's it, we're ending this now. They put together the largest army they had ever assembled. We're talking around 80,000 soldiers. And they marched to a place called Cannae to just crush the invaders. They were totally confident that their sheer numbers would just overwhelm. But Hannibal, outnumbered and deep in enemy territory, he wasn't scared. He had a plan, and it was a plan that would go down in history as a textbook example of military genius. So check this out. This was his masterpiece. Hannibal deliberately put his weakest soldiers right in the center and told them to slowly fall back. The massive Roman army, thinking they were winning, just surged forward into that gap. But it was a trap. As the Romans pushed deeper,
Hannibal's best troops, who were waiting on the sides, swung inwards like a closing door, completely surrounding the much larger Roman force.
And the result? It was an absolute catastrophe for Rome. In a single day of fighting, something like 70,000 Roman soldiers were either killed or captured. It is still one of the deadliest, most lopsided battles in the history of warfare. Rome was shaken to its absolute core.
For 15 years, Hannibal just terrorized Italy. But Rome, they refused to surrender. What they needed was their own brilliant general, someone who could think like Hannibal. And eventually, they found him.
His name was Scipio, and he realized something brilliant. For all those years, Rome had been playing defense in their own country. Scipio's idea was just as bold as Hannibal's. If you can't beat the guy in your backyard, then go attack his. He decided to take the fight directly to Carthage's home turf in Africa.
And the plan worked perfectly. The leaders back in Carthage totally panicked, and they called Hannibal home to defend the city. So the two greatest generals of their age finally met at the Battle of Zama. But Scipio had studied Hannibal's tactics, and he came prepared. He used these loud horns to scare the war elephants, and even created open lanes in his lines for the panicked animals to run straight through without hurting his men. By outthinking the master tactician himself, Scipio won the final decisive victory for Rome.
So Carthage was beaten again. But for some people in Rome, that just wasn't enough. An entire generation had grown up terrified of Hannibal, and they wanted to make sure that Carthage could never, ever threaten them again. This whole feeling was perfectly captured by a famous Roman senator named Cato the Elder. He became so obsessed with getting rid of their old rival that he supposedly ended every single speech he gave in the Senate, no matter what the topic was, with the same chilling phrase, Carthago delende est, which means Carthage must be destroyed. And in the end, Rome got its wish. They used a pretty minor dispute as an excuse to declare the Third Punic War. And after a brutal 3-year siege of the city, they showed absolutely no mercy. They burned the city to the ground, brick by brick, and sold every single survivor into slavery. Carthage wasn't just defeated, it was literally erased from the map.
So the crucial takeaway here is that Rome's victory over Carthage changed everything. Rome was now the one and only superpower in the Mediterranean. They started calling it Mare Nostrum, which means our sea. This total victory is what set the stage for Rome to transform from a republic into the massive Roman Empire that would dominate the Western world for the next 500 years.
And that leaves us with one of history's biggest what-ifs. What if Hannibal had won at Zama? What if Carthage, a North African, sea-trading empire, had become the dominant power? Would our laws be different? Our languages? Our governments? What would our world actually look like today? It's pretty amazing to think about.